Rosa, you're the wife, so from today you will live in this house and take care of Mom with me. That's right, you should take care of me. I'm weakened by the loss of my husband. If you resist, I'll make sure you and my son get divorced. Despite her supposed frailty from mourning her late husband, my mother-in-law spoke with surprising vigor. Normally, one might be shocked and disturbed by this situation, but I was completely calm. This was exactly as I had anticipated, and I had already been planning to distance myself from this family and making future plans with my sons. With a firm stance, I declared, "Then I'll quit being your daughter-in-law and claim $220,000. Dwayne and I will leave the house. If you are going to live with your mother, Louis, first make sure to pay me back half of the $200,000 I put down to buy this house." What? Furthermore, with the support of my sons, I resolved to teach this capricious family a lesson. I, Rosa Anderson, am a 45-year-old married woman of 20 years, balancing my career and parenting. I'm a working mother. My husband, Louis, had been a senior colleague when I was a new employee, teaching me how to work carefully. We had worked in the same department for 2 years, handling many projects together. When he was about to be transferred, I was scheduled to move to a nearby branch, but just before that, he made an unexpected confession. "Actually, from the first day you came to the company, I've always been interested in you, but seeing each other every day, I couldn't find the right moment to say it. Would you consider dating me?" Upon hearing his words, I hesitated for a moment. This was because of the several odd rumors I had heard about Louis over the past 2 years. According to his colleagues and close work friends, Louis had a very close relationship with his family, which sometimes gave others a sense of discomfort. Concerned about whether this mommy's boy relationship was truly harmless, I cautiously asked him about it. Louis, you live at your parents' home, right? If we date and I work late and come home late, you wouldn't be unhappy, right? And if we get married, there's no chance we would have to live with your parents, right?" To my casual inquiry, Louis responded with an unexpectedly pleased look. "Ah, does that mean you really understand my family situation? That makes me happy, but please don't worry. Even though I live at my parents' house, I have no intention of living with them even after we get married." Louis's response caught me by surprise. His words conveyed a clear vision for the future, which gradually alleviated my anxieties. I felt there was some misunderstanding there. However, at that time I lacked the courage to correct him and ended up accepting the misunderstanding as a temporary basis in order to start our relationship. Although I agreed to the relationship reluctantly, once we actually started dating, I discovered that Louis was more wonderful than I had expected. There was no trace of him being a mommy's boy, and our relationship smoothly progressed into romance. About a year into our relationship, Louis surprised me with a marriage proposal, and we decided to get married. After the wedding, my in-laws were incredibly warm people, and I felt truly relieved about my relationship with them. However, right after the birth of our first child, Hector, the new parent anxiety was palpable, and sensing this, my in-laws did not visit very often, opting instead to behave modestly. 2 years after Hector's birth, when our second son, Dwayne, was born, there was a noticeable change in my in-laws' behavior. Their excitement increased, and their celebratory feelings for the children became even stronger. Despite this, I deeply respected my kind in-laws and harbored no grievances against them. Our daughter-in-law gave us 2 boys. "She is truly wonderful," my mother-in-law would often say, which pleased me, and I felt that they saw the boys as the future successors of our family. As time went on, my in-laws visited our home more frequently. My mother-in-law often came with my father-in-law, making our house quite lively, while my modest father-in-law always seemed apologetic towards me. As if she was imposing, my mother-in-law showed no signs of leaving and often stayed and talked for hours. The occurrence of this situation might partly be because our current house is coincidentally very close to my in-laws' house. With this in mind, I decided to bring up a suggestion to Lewis. Hey, now that our family has grown, should we consider moving to a larger place? I suggested. Lewis appeared a bit puzzled and asked, do we really need to? Do you know any other family that is moving as well? I explained using the example of friends who had recently taken out mortgages to buy new homes. There's a good property in the new residential area in the neighboring town, and if we take out a 25-year mortgage, we can afford it, I continued. I expected him to be pleased with this suggestion, but Lewis looked even more puzzled. Actually, I'm not good with taking out loans. I would consider it if I won the lottery and could pay for the house in cash, he replied. I was honestly surprised and somewhat dismayed by his unrealistic proposal, but the rent we're paying now is not much different from a mortgage payment, so I think it's ultimately more beneficial for us to own our home, I firmly argued. Despite that, his reaction was far from what I had hoped for, and he responded as if I was the villain forcing him into something. Rosa, are you perhaps dissatisfied that our house is near my parents' home? Don't forget you are the precious wife who has given birth to the children who will carry on this family's future. That's why it's so important to get along well with my parents. Actually, we're still lucky because we're not living with them. Lewis's words left me speechless, unable to find a reply. His parents visited our house frequently, but indeed, they never directly pressured me to respect the family. However, that one sentence from Lewis felt like something inside me had broken. Taking advantage of my silence, Lewis's attitude changed dramatically thereafter, and he often lashed out at me with harsh words. Each time, the atmosphere became even heavier. When my mother-in-law learned of this, she drastically changed her behavior and began to exert a clear pressure on me. I've been quiet until now, but I can't stand to see you talk down to Lewis. From now on, I'll make sure you are properly educated as a daughter-in-law, so be prepared, she declared. From then on, my life became a series of torments, and Lewis and his mother started treating me not as a family member but as if I were their property. She used the excuse of wanting to spend more time with her grandchildren to stay at our house almost every day, and her presence heavily weighed on my daily life. Furthermore, she made me prepare dinner, including for them, even though we were both working. Lewis spent most of his time lying down under his mother's watchful eye, hardly helping with the housework. I had no choice but to follow the instructions of my mother-in-law and Lewis, unable to express my own opinions. However, as the children grew up, especially our eldest son Hector, he began to express his dissatisfaction with his grandmother's actions without reservation. "Grandma, please don't overwork Mom." At Kevin's house, his grandmother helps out with cooking while his mom works, Hector said. Hector's words felt like a ray of light to me, offering a glimmer of hope and salvation. However, my mother-in-law countered his opinion mercilessly. She was strict even with her grandson Hector, refusing to acknowledge any complaints against herself. "We are different from other families. We decide things in our own home." "Are you saying this because your mother has been influencing you?" "Rosa, you're not doing a good job with parenting," she shouted loudly. Faced with these words, I had no choice but to apologize. Even though I felt it was unfair deep down, I ended up scolding Hector. "Hector, you shouldn't say things like that. It's not right to speak to Grandma that way," I said, even though I felt sorry for him inside. "Why?" "The problem is with Grandma. Do you know how busy Mom is? Grandma just sits around doing nothing," Hector argued back. Hearing this, my mother-in-law, trying not to be put at a disadvantage, advised Hector again. "Well, it's not that you are wrong per se, Hector. The real problem, I think, is that your mother isn't disciplining you properly," she declared. which weighed heavily on my heart, provoked by the inappropriate comment. Hector visibly got angry and stood up. "I can't take it anymore. I really hate Grandma," he shouted, and overwhelmed with anger, he left the dinner table without eating and went back to his room. Witnessing this scene, the younger Dwayne, unable to understand the situation, began to cry. This incident further heightened the tension within the family. Seizing this moment, I decided to discuss the purchase of a house with Louis again. I knew he was hesitant about using a loan, but he agreed to a plan where we would save diligently together and pay in cash when we had enough funds. However, I understood that it would take a long time to acquire the home we wanted. I was determined not to accept any help from my in-laws. Therefore, I reviewed our household finances, made every effort to save as much as possible, and committed to economizing wherever feasible. Now, 20 years into our marriage, we finally managed to buy our own home. Considering that Dwayne would be an 11th grade student and facing exams next year, I prepared a study room for him facing the window on the second floor. Meanwhile, Hector had started college and was living on his own, but we kept his room as it was so he could use it when he came home. With the purchase of our 4-bedroom house, we gained a spacious living environment including a master bedroom and a traditional European-style guest room. The new house is at a reasonable distance from my in-laws' house, which I hoped would reduce their frequent visits. However, the peaceful days I longed for were short-lived. Especially on weekends, the situation became unexpectedly complicated. Without consulting me, Louis would decide on his own to pick up his parents by car and invite them over to our house. As a result, my in-laws began visiting almost every weekend. This ongoing situation led me to question myself, why did we even bother buying our own home? Each time my mother-in-law visited, she would keenly inspect every corner of the new house. "Oh, what a lovely home. Louis really did well. You should be grateful to him," she would say. I could only manage a wry smile in response, barely mustering a yes. It seems my mother-in-law mistakenly believed the house was purchased solely with Louis's income. Meanwhile, every time my father-in-law visited, he appeared genuinely apologetic. "Rosa, I'm really sorry. It's regrettable that we invade your weekends like this," he would apologize. While he felt hesitant about the visits, my mother-in-law forcibly brought him along. This fact pained me, and it was hard to bear considering his feelings. "No, father-in-law, please don't hesitate on our account." "You're welcome any time," I replied, but my mother-in-law would interrupt. "That's right. After all, this is your son and daughter-in-law's house, isn't it? So naturally, it's ours too," she boasted. Although I wanted to object inwardly, I couldn't openly dispute her in front of everyone, which made my father-in-law's consideration go unrewarded. Thus, my inability to speak my mind due to my mother-in-law's overbearing interference persisted for months. The stress from my intense work and the exhaustion from living frugally began to take a toll, and I started experiencing stomach pains, which cast a shadow over my daily life. Reaching my limit, I sought medical help at a gastroenterologist near my workplace and was diagnosed with a duodenal ulcer. Going forward, it was imperative for me to avoid stress as much as possible. After my medical appointment, as I was settling the payment, I unexpectedly ran into someone in the waiting room. "Father-in-law? Why are you here? This hospital is far from where you live." It turned out he was there for a gastroenterology consultation as well. After enduring years of stress and fatigue from my mother-in-law's pressure, my father-in-law had developed a stomach ulcer. However, he chose this distant hospital to avoid my mother-in-law finding out, as there was a risk he might be discovered if he went to a local hospital. "I see. I'm really worried about your health, father-in-law. Please take care not to overdo things." "Ah, thank you. Please keep this matter a secret from my wife and Louis." My father-in-law always did not want to bother others with his issues. Unaware of this, my mother-in-law continued to behave as she pleased. She began staying frequently in Hector's room, which she thought was unused. One day, when my mother-in-law visited, a large package arrived. Upon opening it, it was a karaoke set. "Look at this. There's an unused room, right? I'd like to put it there. There are too many troublesome people in my neighborhood, and I can't enjoy karaoke at home." That's problematic. Our house isn't soundproof, and we have neighbors to consider, plus we've just moved in, so I'm worried about what they might think. However, Lewis brushed over what I said. "Just allow this. It's her only pleasure," Lewis lightly responded. "But Dwayne is preparing for his exams, and regarding karaoke, she can do it outside, which is cheaper during weekday afternoons." "Really, you make such a fuss. I dislike going out, so it's better for me to relax at home. There shouldn't be a problem, right?" "Oh, yes. He can study when she is not around." How long will these self-centered attitudes continue? Meanwhile, my father-in-law looked at me again. I could tell he was trying to apologize to me. I was worried about his mental state if this situation continued. Afterward, there was no contact from my mother-in-law for a while, and I had a nagging feeling of unease. Then, while I was at work, I suddenly received a call from her. She said hurriedly, with tears in her voice, "I'm so glad I got through. I tried contacting Lewis, but there was no response. Dad is in critical condition. Please come quickly." I immediately left work and rushed to the hospital I was directed to. Lewis managed to arrive just in time, but both were already in tears. My father-in-law had passed away just before I arrived. He had been suffering from late-stage stomach cancer, and the delayed diagnosis at an inadequately equipped clinic proved fatal. If only we had realized sooner. I couldn't stop my tears either. Afterwards, my mother-in-law seemed devastated, yet she came as if nothing had happened. At that moment, Lewis made a shocking proposal without consulting me. "Rosa, you are the daughter-in-law, so from today you will live in this house and take care of Mom." "That's right, you should be the one taking care of me. I'm weakened by the loss of my husband. If you resist, I will make sure you and my son get divorced." Surprisingly spirited, despite supposedly being weakened by my father-in-law's death, my mother-in-law insisted on this arrangement. She presented a long list with detailed demands regarding living together. The list included care, household chores, and unreasonable demands. Normally, one might be shocked and disturbed by this situation, but I was completely calm. This was exactly as I had anticipated, and I had already been planning to distance myself from this family and making future plans with my sons. With a firm stance, I declared, "Then, I'll quit being your daughter-in-law and claim $220,000. Dwayne and I will leave the house. If you are going to live with your mother, Lewis, first make sure to pay me back half of the $200,000 I put down to buy this house." "What?" The two were shocked by my words. This was true especially for my mother-in-law. Her face showed pure astonishment. Rosa contributed $200,000? Lewis, you said you bought this house in your own name, didn't you?" Caught off guard, Lewis looked flustered. "What are you talking about, Mom? Rosa is just spouting nonsense. It's all lies. She's just trying to squeeze money out of us because she knows we can't make it without her," Lewis said. My mother-in-law completely believed his words and seemed relieved. "Oh, was that it? I almost got tricked. There's no way Rosa, just a housewife, could earn $200,000 on her own. You're really bad at lying." "Mother-in-law, why would you say that? I've never quit working since before I was married, and I currently hold a higher position than Lewis. Also, my company allows me to have a side job." I explained this as I pulled out my salary slips and records of payments from my side job. Lewis was shocked to see them. "What? You're earning this much now? But how can you make so much from a side job?" This is the result of my continued efforts. My income increased significantly while I was writing articles on saving and investing. The nature of my side job was hard for my mother-in-law to understand, but she seemed to accept that I was earning well. I see you're earning well, Rosa, but why do you need to pay so much money to move out? I don't see the necessity. In response to her question, I showed her the house ownership contract and the receipt from the purchase. Look at this, mother-in-law. When we bought this house, we each contributed our share and registered it under joint ownership. As the records show, we each paid half. Therefore, I have a $200,000 stake in this house. My mother-in-law carefully reviewed the documents. After confirming everything, she sharply looked at Louis. "What are you doing? Are you lying to me, Louis? How could you deceive your own parents?" My mother-in-law was tearful, visibly distressed about the future. Despite this, Louis looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Wait a minute. I also paid $200,000. My savings are depleted. How am I supposed to pay you such a large amount? Because we share ownership of this house, if I leave, you need to buy out my share to make the house solely in your name. Otherwise, it would be difficult for you and mother-in-law to live here together." At that, my mother-in-law gasped in surprise. "No, that would be problematic. I've already let go of the previous house. I thought about selling it, but demolishing that old building cost a lot, and I was left with nothing. It would really be a problem if I couldn't live here." "Yes, you are free to leave, Rosa." "Wait, did you just say $220,000? What's the extra $20,000 for?" I couldn't help but laugh at the question. "That's a penalty for the money you embezzled, Louis?" "What? What are you talking about?" Louis looked shocked at my response. Just then, Hector, who had returned home for spring break, entered the room. "I'll take it from here, Dad." "What? What's going on? Hector, you're back and you didn't even say hello." "Dad, last year you were plotting an affair with a young woman, weren't you?" Louis unconsciously started to sweat as Hector brought this up. It was clear he knew something. Seeing Louis recall the past, Hector pulled out his phone from his jacket and showed a specific screen to him. On the screen, there was an image of Louis smirking while embracing a young woman tenderly. "What are you doing, Hector?" "This is from our high school senior class chat. We've kept in touch since graduation. And this girl next to Dad here, she's an old friend of mine." Louis had recently attempted an affair with this woman. Given that she was Hector's old friend, she would have been underage at the time. Yet Louis, without any sense of guilt, boldly stated, "And what's the problem? I haven't done anything wrong with her." From the woman's displeased expression next to him, it was evident that nothing had happened and that Louis had been the one making advances. Hector continued the conversation, his expression indicating he understood the facts. "She was the top student in our class, always focused on her studies. As you can see, she's beautiful. And she's still managing a career and her studies, a respectable woman. So she would never be interested in men like Dad, who think they can get favorable attention by showering young women with gifts." "What did you just say?" Enraged by his son's contempt, Louis suddenly raised his voice. I had heard from Hector before that she worked at a diner that Louis frequented. She worked during the day to help support her family and attended university at night. However, Louis, without knowing her circumstances and exploiting his position as a customer, persistently pressured her to date him. Imagine how frightened she must have been, being repeatedly propositioned by an older man. She was seriously troubled and discussed it in a group chat with Hector and other former classmates, who were her confidants. One of them had asked to see a photo of the man, so she posted a selfie she had taken with Louis. When I saw this photo, I was so embarrassed I turned red. I never imagined that the man doing such embarrassing things would be my own father. Despite his advances, she refused him, but she was confused by the repeated gifts Hector explained. Hearing these facts from his son, all color drained from Louis's face. He might not have realized she was uncomfortable. Then he looked at me, his expression pleading for some form of help. He was probably trying to justify himself that he hadn't actually had an affair, but I am not so forgiving. In fact, Hector had already informed me about this. That's why I secretly checked your bank statements. Indeed, money unrelated to our daily expenses was being withdrawn bit by bit. The total amounted to $20,000. Really, Dad, you're the worst. Mom has been working her job and side job, scrimping and saving for our home. And just to be clear, Mom has been paying for our schooling too, without any help from you. Chastised by Hector, Louis hung his head in shame. He muttered quietly, looking down. I too. No matter how hard I tried, I always felt pressured by Rosa to save money. It was crushing me. That's why I was seduced by temptation. Hearing this, my mother-in-law comforted Louis by gently patting his back. You shouldn't blame yourself. Louis, you did nothing wrong. The problem is with Rosa, not you. You felt lonely, so you looked elsewhere. Rosa has no right to blame you. She said this as she vehemently scolded me. Unable to contain her anger, she turned to Hector, her fury intensifying. And you, Hector. Like mother, like son, huh? What kind of attitude is that towards a father who has cared for you all these years? You've been spoiled since you were a child, always acting so high and mighty, and you're far from endearing. Just moments ago, she had been feeling insecure due to the disadvantageous situation, but her son was clearly the most important thing to her. She continued to vehemently criticize us. However, no matter how much she resisted, the truth wouldn't change. I had a lot more I wanted to say to her. Mother-in-law, are you not the one who is truly unsuitable as a wife to your late husband? What? What are you saying? Taken aback by my sudden question, she stared at me in shock. At that moment, I remembered the gentle face of my father-in-law, and tears spilled over. With desperation, I let all my sadness pour out to her. Father-in-law, he endured without saying a word about your arrogance. Still, he didn't want to worry you and silently went to the hospital. He had an ulcer, but if he had received treatment at a better-equipped hospital, mother-in-law, if you had been a little more compassionate, his cancer might have been discovered earlier. Her face gradually turned pale. So, it's my fault he died so soon? No, that can't be. No, she cried out and collapsed into tears, covering her face with her hands. Watching this, Louis comforted her by gently rubbing her back. Are you okay, Mom? Rosa, why would you say such a thing? Dad's death was due to illness. It's not Mom's fault. Stop it, Dad. Responding to the heated argument, Dwayne emerged from the living room. He had been tidying up around the house. What's going on now, Dwayne? I hear you've been slacking off on your studies recently. Have you given up on going to college? I haven't given up, but after finishing high school, I plan to work first before going to college. I love Mom, but I don't want to live depending on her like someone else. Dwayne's determination was firm, but Louis and my mother-in-law frowned at his words. Is this your doing too, Rosa? Always looking down on your father. Really, none of the grandchildren in this family have been raised right, not a single decent one among them. Is it wrong for me to pursue my education? I don't want to be an adult who depends on his parents forever like Dad. Louis was left speechless by this remark. My mother-in-law muttered in disbelief. I can't believe this, clearly unable to argue any further. Dwayne had grown up witnessing his grandmother come to the house and spoil Louis. He had decided long ago not to follow in his father's footsteps. So when I discussed the idea of leaving Louis and moving out, Dwayne had said, "Then I'll go with you, Mom. It might be tough until I graduate from high school, but after that, I'll work and pay for my own college tuition. So Mom, don't worry about me." Despite my worries about the unstable influence of their father, both children had grown up strong and independent. Louis looked at Dwayne with a disdainful eye, accusing him of being impudent. However, no matter how sternly he glared, he was no longer able to raise his voice. Dwayne was preparing for us to move out while everyone else was arguing. When Louis realized that we were ready to leave at any moment, he finally broke down. "Well, if you're leaving the house, that's one way to go. But it's not feasible for me to pay for your share in one go, Rosa. Please, if you can settle it with monthly payments, I'd like to transfer the house to my name." My mother-in-law, witnessing the scene, also broke down. "I beg you too. I can't have a peaceful life if things stay as they are," she pleaded, breaking down in tears. In the end, I agreed to accept monthly payments from Louis, and Dwayne and I left the house. The $20,000 Louis spent on the young woman was included in the monthly payments as part of the divorce settlement. I also proceeded with the divorce papers. However, our departure was a major blow to Louis and his mother. Louis had never once done any cleaning or laundry, and his mother was mostly helpless as my late father-in-law had managed most household chores. After everything had settled down, I went to Louis's place to get him to sign the divorce papers. However, when I visited, the house was already a mess in less than a week, with trash overflowing both inside and out, and a foul smell that required me to cover my nose even before entering the doorway. This situation has evidently become a nuisance to the local residents, and not merely because of the trash. My former mother-in-law appears to still be indulging in her karaoke sessions. Even when I visited, I didn't see her, but her singing was resonating loudly. It seems inevitable that complaints from neighbors would arise if this continues. Indeed, I found a note in the mailbox written in large letters, "Stop singing karaoke at home. It's noisy." The provocative message was surprising. Despite the warnings from neighbors, it appeared that my former mother-in-law was not inclined to stop her karaoke sessions. After the divorce was finalized, I had to visit Louis's house again because, over the past few months, his repayments had ceased, and I needed to press him about it. However, upon arriving, I found the house empty and in a worse state than before, resembling more of a garbage dump. Local residents informed me that my former mother-in-law continued singing until late at night, and eventually the neighbors called the police. They were instructed to clean up not only the outside but also the heaps of garbage inside, which were left untouched. Due to their weak connections with the community, nobody knew exactly when the two had left. It was rumored in the neighborhood that they might have fled overnight to avoid paying for garbage removal or to dodge the police. Attempts to contact them were fruitless, suggesting that they might no longer be able to afford their cell phone bills. In an effort to prompt payment, I visited the branch where Louis had worked, only to discover that he had resigned about 6 months ago. Further investigation revealed that Louis had been involved in multiple break-ins and thefts and had been arrested for these crimes. However, the whereabouts of my former mother-in-law remained unknown. Recently, I spotted something resembling a makeshift hut made of cardboard by the river. At night, I could hear a woman singing loudly from it, which might be her. Still, it might be best to avoid further involvement with her. Ultimately, I decided to write off the payments from Louis. Hector, who is now in his senior year of college, has already secured a job and is currently focusing on part-time work. Hector has recently started dating a new girlfriend. She is the same woman Lewis once pursued, who was Hector's former classmate. She is a strong, independent person who always tries to solve problems on her own and strives not to burden her family. Hector apologized to her for the trouble his father caused her in the past. Perhaps it was his sincerity that attracted her. After graduating high school and starting work, Dwayne decided to enroll in the night university that Hector's girlfriend attends. Now that their parents have separated, he is eligible for financial support for his tuition, but he wishes to achieve as much as he can on his own. A few years later, Hector's wedding was set. He and his girlfriend have already built a good relationship, and she suggested we live together once they get married, but I declined. I believe it is better for parents and children to live independently, to avoid unnecessary concern for each other. I explained this to her and told her, marriage is about supporting each other, and it's important to work together as a couple. If you ever need help, you can always rely on me. She responded with tears in her eyes, "Yes, thank you." I am truly happy to see Hector surrounded by wonderful people, and am incredibly satisfied seeing how well my sons have grown. My own income is stable, and I have had no financial troubles following my divorce from Lewis. Now that the challenging phase of parenting is over, I plan to find new hobbies to enjoy more of my personal time.